In a previous video, we looked at the life of Mozart, one of the greatest composers of classical music. Today we're going to talk about Beethoven, a man who would compete with Mozart for the name of greatest composer. He was born in 1770 in the city of Bonn, which today is in Germany. Beethoven came from a musical family. His father was a singer and his grandfather was a famous musician. According to tradition, his father was a very strict teacher. He made the young Beethoven work very hard and study music all the time. Beethoven was made to stay at the piano and practice for hours and hours. If he made a mistake, his father would beat him, and Beethoven was often crying while he practiced. His father's strict teaching and Beethoven's natural genius would turn him into a great composer and musician. This genius and talent didn't show itself very early though. Mozart had been giving concerts when he was only 5 or 6 years old. Beethoven's father wanted his son to be as good as Mozart, so he made the young Beethoven give a concert at the age of 6 too. Beethoven performed well, but he didn't become famous like Mozart had done. When he was 10 years old, Beethoven dropped out of school and went to study music full time. He wrote his first piece of music a couple of years later, when he was 12. He was then sent to study with Mozart himself. He played some music for Mozart, who recognized his talent. He didn't accept Beethoven as a student, but he did say, "Keep your eyes on him. Someday he will give the world something to talk about." However, when Mozart died, it was now another great man who was seen as the greatest composer in Europe, Joseph Haydn. Beethoven went to Vienna and studied with Haydn. Around this time, he started writing his own music, and he became more and more famous. Later in his life, he would look back at these early works and think they weren't very good. In fact, he said, "In those days, I did not know how to compose." However, other people didn't agree with this. They loved his music. Over the next few years, he would write more and more great works and would become one of Europe's favorite composers. During these years, Napoleon was coming to power in France. Beethoven saw Napoleon as a great man, a man of talent and ambition. He wrote some music and dedicated it to Napoleon. However, when Napoleon went too far and made himself emperor, Beethoven changed his mind. He changed the name on the piece of music he'd written. His feelings towards Napoleon would change over his lifetime. Sometimes it would be hate, and sometimes it would be respect. Beethoven himself wasn't ever very happy though. He was lonely and shy, and never married or had children. He was also short-tempered, or easy to anger, and had arguments with many different people. This was probably due to something that was happening to him, something that worried him a lot. From about the age of 26 onwards, Beethoven started to discover a serious problem. He noticed that his hearing was getting worse, that he was becoming deaf. He couldn't understand what people were saying to him, and he slowly started to get very depressed. Music was the thing he loved, and if you're deaf, you can't hear music. He thought his life as a composer would soon be over. We actually know quite a lot about Beethoven and his life because of this deafness problem. Because he couldn't hear what people were saying, he asked his friends to write things down in a book. These books have told us a lot about his life and the things he talked about, such as his music and how he wanted it to be played. Even though he was getting increasingly deaf, he still continued to write music. He thought that his time was running out, that he didn't have long left. He therefore tried to write as much as possible, as quickly as he could. Between the years of 1803 and 1812, he wrote more pieces of music than any other composer in history. But the amazing thing is that this music wasn't rushed or bad. It was in fact his best and most beautiful work. People agree that he composed his greatest music towards the end of his life, when he was almost completely deaf.